What's up, guys? I'm Fabio Salas, and welcome to the Living Mad channel, where we talk all about the American dream. So today's video is quite a bit longer than any of my previous videos, but I really hope you make it all the way through, because I honestly believe the information and content of today's video can make a huge difference in your life, especially if you're young, high school, college, fresh out of college. If you start implementing what I'm going to tell you in today's video, you're going to be well on your way to becoming a millionaire. If you already know this information, great. Share the video with somebody who might not. Maybe your kids that are in high school. Maybe somebody that you know in college. Regardless of your age, maybe you're 40 years old, but this is brand new to you. Watch it and implement today. And I'm telling you, it will make a difference as you prepare for retirement. As always, if you like what I've been putting out, make sure to hit that like button so that everybody out there knows that this is a video they should be watching. Enjoy. Alright guys, so this is the Thrift Savings Plan. This is a website that the military and the US government uses, or employees of the military and the US government use, to track their retirement investments. Although, like I said, this is for the military and government employees, this is very similar to any website that you would use to track your index funds, whether they be with Vanguard, Fidelity, or something similar for your 401k. So there's various different calculators that we can use. We're just going to pick one here. How much will my savings grow? Because on this website, you can combine it later on. So uniform services, this is federal employees. Again, it's going to be very similar to something you can use. So don't worry about this being specifically TSP. This says existing account balance. So how much you already have in your retirement account, and future contributions if you're not at retirement age already, how much you plan to invest. So we're going to say both, just because I want to show you the different scenarios. So the example that I'm using is a 22-year-old college graduate who, whether it's through a loan, somehow, some way, has access to $25,000, and they're going to put that all into an account by the age of 22. So since that college graduate is 22, they're going to leave that in the account for 43 more years until they're 65. Their annual pay when they graduate as military officers will be around $60,000, depending on the city they're in and how much their housing allowance is. I would hope that they invest at least 10% of their annual income, minimum. Really, it should be more like 20%, but we'll say 10% minimum. And their pay increase is going to vary. Obviously, some years the military gets 1%. Sometimes they get close to 2%, so we'll just say 1.5%, kind of averaging it out. We're not going to do any catch-up contributions because we're assuming that this is a 22-year-old, so they're starting relatively early. Number of years left until you begin withdrawing. So again, they're 22, so they're going to wait 43 years before they start withdrawing from the Thrift Savings Plan or the 401k or whatever retirement account it is. We're going to shoot for the moon and say that they will average 10% annual returns. And I'm saying this because the way that I invest in the Thrift Savings Plan is I use their fund that tracks the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is one of many index funds, but it's one that I highly encourage or recommend to people because it's relatively safe. It's not it can be volatile on really bad years. So when you look at every recession, S&P 500 index funds usually tend to do pretty bad. 2008, they were losing big. So if you had money invested that tracked the S&P 500, you probably lost a lot of money those years. But as soon as the economy came back, not only did you make back all that money, but now you should have made more money on top of that. So when you think about index funds, you can't think short term. You got to think long term. This is why this is at 43 years. When you think long term, you don't worry about the market drops. It can drop 50%. It's not a big deal because you're thinking long term. You know that eventually the S&P 500 is going to come back. And for those of you who don't know, the S&P 500 tracks the 500 biggest companies in America. So it can change. The biggest 500 in America today are not going to be the same 500 next year or the year after. So the fund managers will track this and make sure that they do include the biggest companies. So as long as America does not fall within your lifespan, at least economically, you can trust that the S&P 500 is going to return uh, pretty good to above good or above average returns, which on average is around 10%. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind, we're saying that it averages about 10%, but when you account for inflation, the real life returns are around 7.5, 8% returns. 2% difference is a huge difference, but you do need to take into account that inflation will lower the value of your money over time. So 10% is really going to be 8%, which is still very good over 43 years. So let's see what happens. All right, so here's what we got. So we're saying that we're starting off with $25,000 in your existing account balance. So at 22 years old, you've got 25 grand in your retirement account. After 43 years, the $25,000 is going to become $1.4 million, so almost $1.5 million. If that's all you do, you put 25 grand in there, leave it for 43 years, it's going to become almost $1.5 million after 43 years. And that's because of the power of compound interest. The first year, it's only going to make 2,500 bucks. But now the second year, you've got $27,500. So now you make 10% off of that, which will be $2,700. So in the next year, you've got close to $30,000. Third year, you're making 10% off of that. That's $3,000. So you see how it all adds up quickly to where by the end, let's look at the chart for that, the table. So existing balance, start off with 25 grand. And again, it only grows $2,500 the first year. And you'll notice this is where it shows you the years. So year 1, 2, 3, it grows relatively slowly at first. At year 10, you're only at 39 grand, so you've only made $15,000. At year 20, you're at 143 grand. So in 20 years, you've only made $118,000. Year 30, here, you're at 411. So you're starting to get up there now, but still a little under $400,000. You're at about what, 389. But now you're making interest on this much money, $411,000. So what starts to happen, and actually this is the growth. So this is 411,000 plus the 25, right? So what starts to happen, compound interest, you're making the interest on that growth. So it's a little bit more each year. So notice, it took you 30 years to get to $400,000. But now by year 35, just 5 years later, you're at 677. So in just 5 years, it's a difference of $260,000. By year 40, you're at $1 million. So actually you hit your first million at 39 years. Even though it took you 17 years to get to $100,000 right up here, it takes you another 22 years to get to $1 million. So you make 900 grand in 22 years. Again, compound interest, how it just keeps adding up. Now notice these last couple years. So from year 39 to year 40, you make 100 grand. The next year, another 100 grand. Next year, 130 grand. So it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so that by year 43, you're at close to $1.5 million. So it's really these last few years right in here where you're going to see the biggest difference from years 39 to year 43. And this is why it's so important, guys, to start investing as early as possible. As early as you can possibly start investing. If you can start at 18, as soon as you become an adult, start at 18. All right, so now we go back up and look at future contributions. So this is, you're 22 years old, and you're going to start contributing into your retirement account today, every single month, until you're 65. And we said 10%, starting off with an annual income of $60,000 a year, saying that your income increases by about 1.5% per year. Now, hopefully your income will increase by more than that, whether you stay in the military or not. Hopefully it increases by more than that, but we're being conservative, saying you start off with 60 grand, income increases by 1.5%, and we say you're going to save at least 10% of that every single year. So over the span of 43 years, you will have contributed $358,000, almost 360 grand. But that money will grow to $3.9 million, almost $4 million. This money that you invested becomes almost $4 million over the span of 43 years. So when you add your future contributions plus what you make from the $25,000 that you started with, you end up with $5.8 million, almost $6 million. And again, you'll notice year zero, when you graduate college, you've got nothing. First year, 10% of 60 grand is $6,000. You make 270 grand from that. So you start off with 25 grand, add the 6,000, and you're at 33,770. That's the 2,500 that you made from the initial balance, plus the $270 that you made from adding $6,000. Put it all together, you're at 33 grand. So again, you'll notice that the first couple of years is not growing too fast. By year 10, you're at 170 grand. It's good, it's not great. By year 20, you're a little over half a million, 565 grand. But again, it's the last 5 years. Notice it took you 26 years to get to a million. 26 years to get to a million. But then, from year 26, it only takes you 7 more years to get to your second million. So the first million was 26 years. The second million was only 7 years later. 7 years. And you get to your third million right around here. So 3 years later, from year, where were we? From year 26 to year 33 to year 36. And then your fourth million, nope, right over here, year 39. So another 3 years. So again, you notice how fast it climbs. Then from year 39, again, a little less than 40, a little less than the year 42. So a little less than 3 years. So again, that compound interest just keeps adding on top of itself, where it just keeps growing and growing and growing. Now, I'm showing you one scenario, but TSP and many of your retirement accounts are going to have what they call life cycle funds or target age funds. So what they do is they'll start you off in a somewhat aggressive index fund where you'll have maybe 60% of S&P 500 and maybe 20% of international index fund and 10% of this and 5% of that, all to add up to 100% of your contributions. But as you get closer, again, keep in mind, these are the years, as you get closer to retirement age, they'll start shifting your contributions from the more risky funds to the safer ones. So that by the time you get to here, years 40, 41, 42, your last couple years when you're about to retire, they will shift most of your contributions to safer funds or safer accounts like government bonds or just anything that's going to be a whole lot less apt to lose during a recession or bad economic downturns. Now, I'm not going to say that they get awful returns, but usually a lot of those funds are going to try to get you somewhere around 4, maybe 5% average annual returns. So that's about half of what you would get if you were to keep it in an account like the S&P 500. Now, what I recommend to you, and this is something that I hadn't thought about until my boss told me this just a couple years ago, maybe a year or two ago. He was telling me, if you don't start withdrawing all of your money right away, if you're conservative about how much you withdraw from your retirement account, there's no need to take it out of your S&P 500 index fund, because the money you're making every year, if you withdraw equal to what it makes every year or a little bit less than what it makes every year, you're going to maintain that growth. And if you have enough savings, say that there's a recession and the recession lasts for 3 years. If by the time you get to retirement, you've got enough set aside to support you for a year or two, then you don't have to worry about your account, your retirement fund, being depleted for a year or 2, 3 years, 4 years, because you've got other assets, you've got other investments that are helping you survive those tough years. So that's another reason why I think investing in index funds is good, but investing in real estate is great because it can help support you through the lean years. Okay, so we said this was kind of shooting for the moon, right? 10%. And in all reality, it might not be shooting for the moon because, again, S&P 500 has historically earned around 10% returns. And I'm talking historically as in 50 plus years. If you look at the 50 last years, it has earned around 10%. There's been years where it's been negative 20%, negative 25%. So if you lost 20% of your retirement fund, and we're saying we're at almost 6 million, if you lost 20% this year, that would be $1.2 million that you would lose from your retirement account. And that's terrible. That's scary, right? But again, looking at history, the US economy has always recovered. Now, there may come a day when the US is not the global empire that it is today. But I'm hoping, or I don't think, that it's going to be during my lifetime, and I don't think it's going to be during the lifetime of any of you that are watching this video. So if you believe me, if you think America is going to survive at least until the end of your lifetime, or the economy of the US is going to survive at least until the end of your lifetime, then you can somewhat assume that you'll be able to replicate 8% returns. But let's say that you don't. So let's go back and change this. And we said that it was going to get us 10% annual returns. But let's say that the next 40 years are not as good as the previous 50. We're going to change it to 8%. So you think 2%, not a big deal, right? It's only 2 percentage points. We didn't change anything else. We still got the 60 grand annual pay, same annual increase, same annual savings, same amount of time. We still started with $25,000. The only thing we changed is instead of expecting to get 10% returns, we're going to say we're getting 8% returns. Let's see what that changes for us. So now our existing $25,000 becomes $660,000. I'm averaging out here, $660,000. With 10%, we said it was close to $1.5 million. We still contributed nearly $360,000, but now it only becomes $2 million for a grand total of $3.1 million. So you can see how 2%, even though it doesn't seem like much, can be a huge difference. I mean, this is a difference of almost $3 million. You still started with 25 grand. You still contributed almost 360 grand over the span of 43 years, but you lost out on $3 million only because your investments made 2% less year over year over the span of 43 years. So this is why it's important to not only invest for the long term, but to choose the right investments, guys. And I'm not saying get super risky where you're just throwing money away and, oh, Apple's doing great, so I'm going to throw $50,000 into Apple, because I have a lot more faith in the United States surviving economically for the next 43 years than I have in Apple surviving the next 43 years. And maybe they will. Maybe people are investing in Apple today, and 43 years from now, that's going to be their retirement account. And more power to them if that works. But I think our nation has a much better chance of surviving 43 years than one individual company, because our world is very competitive and it's very hard to stay on top as a company for that long. So, huge difference. So 2 things I want you to take away from this. 1, start investing as early as possible. And 2, be smart about the investments you choose, because they can make a big difference. Huge difference. All right, so the last thing I want to leave you with is one more perspective on debt. A lot of people always talk about debt and how bad debt is. And I'm not going to tell you that debt is good, but I am going to tell you that debt is not always bad. There's different kinds of debt, and debt is not always bad. So say that you're that 22-year-old and you've got a student loan that you want to pay off. And maybe you've got access to a loan that can give you this $25,000 at a very low interest rate. And I'm using this scenario, this example, because this is something that is actually possible to brand new military officers. They have access to a $25,000 loan from a bank that will give them this loan at a very low interest rate. I'm talking 1% or less interest rate, which is amazingly low. Anybody that knows about interest rates for personal loans knows that that is amazingly low. So a lot of new military officers will take this loan and use that to pay off their student loans. But if you think short term, that's great. You're saving the interest rate or some of the interest rate or some of the interest that you would pay on that student loan, right? And after a couple years, the term is 5 years. So after 5 years, this is paid off. Student loans are paid off, and maybe you saved a couple $100. Let's say your interest on that student loan was high, and maybe you saved $5,000 over the course of 5 years. But now let's say that instead of paying off that student loan, you still take out this personal loan, and now you choose to make a little bit of a sacrifice, financial sacrifice for those 5 years, so that you continue to make the student loan payments, but now you're also making payments on this personal loan that you took out on an extremely low interest rate, and you put it into a retirement account. So like we said earlier, that 25 grand becomes $660,000. In the other scenario where we had 10% returns, it became almost $1.5 million. So is it really worth it to take out that loan to pay off a student loan to save 5, 10, say you save $15,000 from those student loans over the course of 5 years? Is that really worth it to save 15 grand in the short term when that same $25,000 can make you 660 grand? Maybe over $1 million if your investments do well over the span of time. So I venture to say you're better off investing that money early on when you're young than trying to pay off student loans that you're going to have to pay off anyway. Yes, if you take out this personal loan, now you're going to be making 2 payments, the student loan plus the personal loan. But if you look at the numbers, you do the math, I think you will see that it makes sense to take out that loan and invest it instead. All right, the last thing I want to leave you with is when you look at this total, one thing I want you to think about is, what does this mean to me? So one simple formula that I want you to keep in mind is called the 4% rule. 4% rule. So all that means is, if you want this to last you forever, and by forever I mean, doesn't matter what age you retire at, whether you retire at 65 or you retire at 40. If you use the 4% rule, this money will never run out. What that means is, keep the money invested in something like the S&P 500, and every year you withdraw no more than 4% of this. So let's say that this is a nice round number, it's $3 million. 4% of $3 million is $120,000. So you can withdraw $120,000 every year, and this money will never run out, because you will be withdrawing less than what your investment is making. In fact, at this large of a number, it's going to grow more than you can pull out every single year. Now let's say that you only saved $1 million, or maybe you didn't have this $25,000 to start with, so all you did was invest 10% per year for 43 years, and you ended at $2 million. So at $2 million, 4% would be $80,000. So now, again, regardless of what year, how old you are, whether you're 35 years old or 65 years old, you can withdraw $80,000 from these $2 million every year for the rest of your life, and that money will theoretically not run out, as long as you keep it invested, as long as you're making good returns on that investment. So S&P 500 or something like that. And again, Vanguard, Fidelity, great companies to invest with. I highly recommend them, but don't just take my advice. Always do your own research before you invest your money. It's your money. Don't let me or anybody else tell you exactly how to run it. You got to figure it out for yourself. But if you do some research, I think you'll come to see that 4% rule and some of the index funds that I've mentioned are great rules and great tips to follow. All right, guys. So like I said at the beginning, this was a little bit longer, quite a bit longer than most of my previous videos, but I really hope you got something out of it. I really do. Again, if you're young, start implementing this now. You're going to be way ahead of your peers by the time you're 40, 50, 60 years old, getting ready to retire. You're going to be a millionaire. That's all there is to it. You are going to be a millionaire if you start doing this at 18, 22 years old. If you got something out of it, share this with others. Hopefully we can get everybody on the path to a nice, easy retirement. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you know when I upload a video. There's a little bell right next to the subscribe button. Click on that and you'll actually get a notification letting you know every time I upload a video. I know this video only covered the basics. Even though it was a longer video, I kind of just went over the basics. So before you start investing, before you go full head on, make sure you do some research, read some books, read stuff online, educate yourself so you can pick the right fund, make the right choices. As I showed you, 2% over 43 years, over 40 plus years can make a huge difference. So I want you guys to make the right decisions and be on your path to becoming a millionaire. If you have any questions, things that I didn't answer, things that maybe I didn't clarify too well in the video, drop those in the comments down below. I'll make sure to answer them as quickly as I can. If need be, I'll make a video to explain it as best as I can. Alright guys, keep living mad, and I'll see you in the next video.